Hello everyone, my name is Sean Smith and I'm here today on behalf of the Association of National Park Rangers, which is a non-profit dedicated to preserving and protecting the national parks as well as promoting the profession of park rangers. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I know you have a lot of things to do and there's a lot of activities that you can partake in. And for you to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour on your cruise with me, I really do appreciate that. So hopefully we're going to have some fun. Today I'm going to talk about some of my most memorable experiences and adventures while wearing the flat hat for the National Park Service. So although before I start, did anyone go to the talk yesterday on? Great. Someone came up to me afterward and reminded me that I didn't tell people how to actually see grizzly bears and bears when they're out. So I told them what to do to not see them, but didn't close the loop on that. So as I said yesterday, there's some things you can do to minimize your risk when you're out in the woods. We make noise, we hike in groups, we don't hike at night. And those things most of the time are going to work because we want to let the bears know that we're coming. We're basically going into their living room, and if someone walked into your house without ringing the doorbell, you might get a little surprised and startled. So we make noise, but there's a real, and when you're out, then how can you judge? There's a lot of things in the news right now about people being too close to animals. Well, is there an easy way to judge the distance between you and the animal to know that you're probably safe? Well, yeah, it's called a rule of thumb, and you basically hold out your thumb. And if you can cover the animal with your thumb, you're probably a safe distance away from that. So a little trick when you're out in the woods. So, all right, that's enough to get us started. So let's get going. So in a former life, I was a park ranger. I got to work in some of America's most iconic places, including Glacier National Park in Montana, Mount St. Helens in Washington State, the North Cascades also in Washington State, and then I finished up my career in Yellowstone. And during that time in those parks, as you can imagine, I got into a number of crazy situations that were all part of the day's work. I was asked to handle emergencies for which I had very little training. I met tens of thousands of people, answered millions of questions, including a few odd ones, which we talked about yesterday. But during that time, I also learned a few things about our parks and the people that inhabit our shared planet. So here are some of my favorite ranger adventures and encounters. So my first Park Service job was with the Park Service at Glacier National Park, and I worked and lived at St. Mary's. Let's see if we can see that. I can't see that up there. But the arrow is the Rising Sun Campground. And one of my favorite parts of the job was actually doing evening programs. Because as the name suggests, it's usually after dinner, the sun's getting ready to go down, and people have eaten, they've spent their day and probably seen their adventures, and they're more than willing to spend a little more time with the ranger to talk about their day, ask questions, find out about what's going to happen tomorrow. So I'm setting up for my evening talk that night, getting ready to light my fire. Let me click one, I'll show you. So this is the Rising Sun Campground there, and you can see there's a meadow behind us. I'm getting ready, I'm setting up, lighting my campfire for the evening, and this gentleman comes down with his dog. And so he comes down, and I can see he's got something on his chest that he wants to get off. He wants to ask me a question. And so he says, "Hey, Ranger, can I ask you something?" And so, as I said last night, every question for a park ranger starts with, "Hey, Ranger." So I'm starting to run through my list of ready responses. You know, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? Do I need reservations for the Lake McDonald Lodge? You know, what's the best hike around here? And so I'm like, shoot, go ahead. He says, "Where are all the bears?" With a little bit of annoyance. I'm like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "Look, I've been here 2 days. I haven't seen a single bear. I'm starting to believe all of this talk the Park Service says about bears and Glacier is just a bunch of hot air." And so I start to laugh a little bit, but then I realize he's being serious. I'm like, "Oh, well, I can assure you there are a number of bears in this park. And so I start to talk about the 600 black bears that roam the woods, as well as the 200 to 300 grizzly bears, and talk about where's the best times to see them, kind of like what we just did, how to safely walk and hike in the national parks. But I could tell he wasn't buying it. He basically, in his body language, was saying, save it. I haven't seen the bears. I think it's a bunch of hot air. Well, about that time, I start to hear his dog bark. And I'm looking at the dog. I'm like, well, that's odd. And I slowly look up to him, and his face is white as a sheet. And my hairs on the back of my neck start to go up. And so I slowly turn around, and I'm pretty sure I know what's going to be back there, and look back behind me, and roughly about where the wall is, there's a nice, healthy black bear walking right by us. Now, at this point, his dog is going berserk. And if anyone knows anything about dogs and bears, they don't mix real well. So, without turning back, I say to the man, I'm like, here's what we're going to do. I need you to pick up your dog, and the two of us are going to start slowly walking out of the amphitheater. I apologize to the bear. I'm like, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to interrupt you on your evening stroll, but we're going to get our things and we're just going to slowly move our way out of here and let you continue on your evening. I also am getting ready to deploy my bear spray. We are given bear spray in the Park Service. I never had to use it and was trained on it, but as I told you, bears and dogs don't mix real well, and I was a little concerned that there may be an encounter between the two of them. So I'm getting ready. I told the man, look, we're not going to run. I need you to go slowly, because if he runs, the bear's predator instincts may be triggered and could possibly chase after us. And that would make for a very long report to my supervisors later that evening, and I didn't want to get into that. So I'm going through all this, and I realize the visitor hasn't responded to me yet, hasn't said, yeah, I hear you. So I turn back around just in time to see him running out of the amphitheater, leaping over chairs and things with the dog clutched under his arm like a football, you know? And so I'm watching that. I turn back around. By this time, the bear has stopped and is sitting, just kind of watching what's going on. So here we are, me and the bear, and I'm just kind of like, shoot, it's just the two of us now. I'm like, okay. Sorry about that. I'm going to grab my hat, I'm going to grab my coat, and I'm just going to slowly head on out to the visitor center. And so I'm kind of crouched, and I'm hiking out, and what seemed like forever to get out of there, I eventually made it out to the parking lot. The visitor's nowhere to be found. Him and his dog, long gone. And I'm certain he thought that that was an entire setup, but I can assure you it wasn't. The worst part of the evening, unfortunately, was I didn't get to give my evening program that night. So after Glacier, I got to work at Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a national monument run by the U.S. Forest Service. It's in Washington State. Anybody been to Mount St. Helens? It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. And so I spent every day in the blast zone up on Windy Ridge. This is the amphitheater there, and you can see how close it is to the volcano. If you haven't been, it's really difficult to convey the magnitude of that eruption and the impact it had on the landscape and the impact it had on the Northwest. And even if you have been there, it's really, really difficult to take this in. The landscape is basically unlike anything you've seen before. In some places, the trees have been, the soil's been ripped down to the bedrock. In others, all the trees are knocked down like matchsticks. And in other areas, they're singed all the way to their bark. So it's hard to really fathom what happened. So what I like to do in my evening programs is work in my own experience with the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980. I grew up in Spokane, Washington. Anyone from Spokane? Yay! And on May 18th of 1980, It was a beautiful Sunday morning in Spokane, and it was about the last weekend before summer vacation, and my brother and I's thoughts were about, the upcoming summer, what we're going to do, and was going to be a lot of not doing things that my parents wanted us to do. So my mom realized that was probably our last weekend before she had us to do anything, and she decided on this day, this is my house that I grew up in Spokane, that we were going to break up our sidewalk and remove all that so we could put in a new sidewalk. See that over there on the street, that area there? So 8:30 in the morning, it's a beautiful day. My brother and I don't want to be out there breaking up the sidewalk. And we've been following Mount St. Helens. It had been going on for several weeks. They were talking about the fact that it was going to erupt soon. There was a bulge growing on the north side. There was puffs of ash that were coming out. And basically the Forest Service and the U.S. Geological Service was estimating it could erupt at any time. So we'd all been watching it like expectant fathers waiting for a birth. Well, when we were out there at 8:30, we were listening to the radio, and we heard Mount St. Helens had erupted. Wow, this is exciting. So my brother and I, and we'd probably done maybe 3 feet at this time of breaking up the sidewalk. My brother and I, we run to our parents and said, Mom, Dad, Mount St. Helens has erupted. Let's go in and watch TV. Let's see it. This is great. Well, for those of you that don't remember, or those of you that don't know, in 1980, we only had 3 channels. 4 if you count PBS. There was no internet. There was no DVR, there was no streaming service, there was none of that. If you wanted to see a live event that was happening, you had to watch it right then. So we're begging and cajoling and basically asking our parents, let's go in, let's go watch the eruption. My mom basically said, look, Mount St. Helens is hundreds of miles away. It's not gonna, nothing we need to worry about. Let's keep working. Okay, so my brother and I, with our heads down, we get our axe or our picks, and we continue to break up the concrete. We're loading it up in wheelbarrows, and then we take it over to our truck and dump it in. We do that for several hours. Well, around noon, I'm looking off to the west, and I start to notice there is a dark cloud forming on the horizon. And it's, again, hard to fathom, but it's not part of the horizon. It's not half the horizon. It's the entire horizon has this dark, menacing, foreboding cloud. You think the end of the world is coming. And I'm looking at that cloud, and I go, Mom, Dad, maybe with a little more fear than I thought I should have, maybe we should go inside. And my mom, being the strong woman she is, she looked up at the cloud. She looked down at what remained of the sidewalk to break up. And what do you think she said? Work faster. So we did. We worked faster. We broke up the rest of that concrete. We loaded it on wheelbarrows, dumped it into the back of the truck, and dove into our house just as the cloud was coming over Spokane. It blocked out the sun. It was as if it was midnight at noon. It was pitch black, and it was eerily quiet. There wasn't a bird, a bug, or anything flying around. And for the next couple hours, ash came down like snow, the consistency of baby powder. Several hours later, the cloud passed over, and basically, Spokane had been transformed to being on the moon. Everything that wasn't nailed down was covered in a fine quarter-inch gray powder. That's not me, but for the next week, we basically spent all of our time. So we just finished breaking up the sidewalk. Now we spent the next week digging out and cleaning up from under Mount St. Helens. I grew up in Spokane and spent some time actually going to school in Alaska as a kid. I never once missed a day of school for snow. I missed an entire week for Mount St. Helens. They didn't know what the health effects were going to be, so the school basically said, we're going to close the schools just to be safe. We spent the entire time cleaning up, digging up. We didn't know what to do with it. We just pushed it all into the street. The city eventually came and picked it up. But I knew, even when I was at that age, I was about 15, that this was a monumental event, that people are going to be talking about where they were and what they did during that. And so I went out and started to collect up all this ash, and I put it in jars, and I put it up in my closet. And I had just, pounds of it. And my mom, she's like, "What are you going to do with all of that ash?" Well, here it is. From Mount St. Helens to Spokane to here. Ash that traveled hundreds of miles and fell on our house. So what I tried to do was incorporate those experiences, which makes it more relatable, the types of things that people were doing and feeling and experiencing when Mount St. Helens erupted. And I think it did help to ground that volcano's eruption. So after Mount St. Helens, I worked at a park called the North Cascades in Stehekin. I think I asked, anyone been to North Cascades? Yeah. It's very remote. It's at the end of a glacier-carved lake. Scenery looks not too unsimilar to this. High, steep canyons on the side, large glacier-carved lake up to Stehekin. And let me see if yeah. So the arrow's pointing where I worked. As I said last night, this is the most remote community in the lower 48. The only way you can get to Stehekin is by plane or by boat or by foot. There are no roads that connect to that community to the outside world. So it's a very unique and small town. Actually, to call it a town is like saying a glass of water is a lake, or a glass of water is a body of water compared to a lake. I mean, it is tiny. There's 300 residents that live there, and there's probably 24 park rangers that live in this community as well. And at that time, we did everything from taking out the garbage to staffing the visitor centers to providing search and rescue and first aid. We also did evening programs, that sort of thing. Well, the high point of the day at Stehekin, if you've ever been there, is the Lady of the Lake ferry landing. So there are 2 ferries that go, well, now there were 2 back then, there's 3 now. There is what's called the fast ferry that arrives fairly early in the morning, and then the regular ferry that comes in the afternoon. And after the ferry lands, people depart, they get off the ferry, it's about 200 people or so, and they're going to start their day, kind of like what we're doing now. Some people are going up valley to take a hike, maybe go wilderness camping. Others are going to rent a bike and go up to the bakery to get something to eat. Still others are going to go up valley to Rainbow Falls. But some will stick around the landing at Stehekin, that's me, the Golden West, and just take in the view. Get some coffee, maybe a little snack, because they're going to take the ferry back that afternoon. And it's at the landing where this next story begins. So I'm at the visitor center. Typical day. Like I said, most people are going to go do their own things, but a handful eventually find their way up to what's called the Golden West Visitor Center. And that's where I'm situated, getting ready to answer those questions for people about the park. When was it established? Why was it established? How many people? That sort of thing. Best place to see bears. And an out-of-breath gentleman bursts into the visitor center. And I'm like, whoa, what happened? Did the ferry sink? Is the landing on fire? I mean, I'm getting ready for anything. And I'm like, is everything okay? And he's like, you need to get down to the landing immediately. I'm like, wait, did somebody have a heart attack? Is something going on? He's, well, someone might if you don't get down there pretty quick. So I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on. But I grab my flat hat, I grab a radio, and I grab a first aid kit just in case. And the visitor center's up here, the landing's down here, and there's a boardwalk that goes down. And you can see all the way out to the landing. And I see a small crowd, kind of assembled, maybe a dozen people, and they're circling something. So I start walking down, and I see everyone turn, and they're looking like, Here comes the ranger. He's going to know what to do. So I get closer and closer. Okay, so here's a trigger warning for anyone that doesn't like legless lizards. Okay. So I get there, and the crowd parts, and not more than a COVID distance away is a very healthy timber rattler sitting on the deck, sunning herself. So just like the people, they like to take in the view in the sun. And so she's just hanging there, not caring about anything. And I see the crowd part, I see the snake, and I let out, "Oh, fudge." Except I didn't say fudge. Everyone looks at me. "All right, Ranger, what are you going to do?" Now, remember, this is the first snake or timber rattler I'd ever seen in the wild. I had no training on how to handle snakes. So I draw myself up, and in my best park ranger voice, I say, "Step back. Give the animal some space." That is the answer or response to every wildlife encounter we have in the Park Service. So everyone steps back a bit. I was hoping the snake would see her error in judgment and basically then slither off. She didn't, of course. So I'm looking at the snake, I'm looking at the people. I can't leave her there because she could get injured and somebody else could get injured. So I pick up my radio and I call the other ranger that's on duty at that time. And she was several miles up valley, so it was going to be a while before she got back to the landing to help me. So in the meantime, this is kind of what happens, I had to do a little song and dance for the next 20 minutes about rattlesnakes, what do they eat, where do you see them, right here, how do you hike safely, that sort of thing. And it seemed like an eternity before my partner was able to get back down here. Now, I was hoping, that she would know what to do, but she had an even stronger reaction to that snake than I did. She didn't want to get anywhere near that snake. Now, I'm not saying she was a scaredy cat. No, she just had a very healthy respect for snakes. In fact, earlier in the summer, she and I had to stare down a bear that was coming down to the landing with basically our voices and a few firecrackers. And we were able to harass that bear and make him double think about his desire to get down to the landing, and they ran off. So the two of us are standing there. We're looking at the snake. She still hasn't decided to move along. And we come up with a plan. We're going to get a shovel and a garbage can. And we're going to try and coax this snake into the garbage can. I got the short straw, so I had to hold the garbage can. And so snake is here, my partner's over there, and I am basically trying to position as much of that can as I possibly can between the snake and me. Now, by this time, you can imagine, there's an even larger crowd that has assembled, and they're watching us, and I'm sure if we did this year, it would have been live streamed on TikTok with the breathless heading, "Rangers wrangle rattlesnake, watch to the end to see who dies." Well, I'll spill the beans. Nobody died. But, so my partner, she's basically like, "Okay, on three, here's what we're going to do." So she gets the shovel and gets it close to the snake. Well, at this point, the snakes realize something's up, and she's not too happy about being roused from her sunbathing. But anyway, so she gets there, she's like, "On three." So she goes 1, 2, 3, does a little kind of scoop and flip, and flips the snake right into the garbage can. I stand it up immediately and put the top on. And you would have thought we performed this amazing magic trick. The whole crowd just erupts into applause. If you've seen movies where the hero's like, "What am I doing?" We get the top on, and we safely remove the snake from the landing. Later that afternoon, I put the snake in the garbage can in the back of the truck, and we transported her far up valley to where she wouldn't be a problem on the landing and less likely to be impacted by visitors. But the point being, we were asked to handle all kinds of adventures and experiences that eventually became nothing more than a typical day in the life of a park ranger. I notice I have a little more time, so I don't have a slide for it, but I'll tell this story too. So it happens in the North Cascades as well. So in the North Cascades, like I said, there's no roads that connect, so I didn't have a car when I worked in Stehekin. And to get home, which my cabin was about 4 miles up road, I either rode a bike or you took the park shuttle. But I usually rode my bike. So once you came down to the landing, it's not like you could go right back up the valley if you forgot something. So you spent pretty much the entire day down on the landing, and then in the evening you would ride home. But once you got home, you were pretty much all by yourself. I mean, you're not going back down to the landing, so you're really remote. So once you've committed to do that, you're going to stay there. So on this evening, I decided I would stop at a friend's house and we'd watch some movies on a VCR because I wasn't ready to turn in for the evening. So we did that. And when it was over, it was about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And I'm getting ready to ride home, so I have about 3 more miles to go. And being the kid that I was back then, I didn't have a light on my bike. And if you've ever been to Stehekin, it is the darkest place I've ever been. And the road is just a regular dirt road with a thick forest on either side. And riding my bike, I could not see more than 4 feet in front of me, the road. It was so dark. In fact, I tell my kids, and they don't believe this, but I had to ride home looking up between the trees in order to see where the road was cut. Needless to say, it took me hours to get home. It was very, very difficult. Well, as I get closer, there's a turn to the left, and there's a bridge, and then it kind of opens up, and I can see that I'm getting closer to home, and actually with the moon out, I could see a little better. So I start to ride a little faster because I'm excited, I'm home, I'm tired, and as I come around the corner, I race right by or through what on the one side was a large black blob, and on the other side was a small black blob. And I went right between the two of them, and I look back and see the small black blob going up a tree, and I see the large black blob racing like crazy after me. So I'm now pedaling with even more vigor. I can see my house. It's just 100 yards away. The black blob is still racing after me, coming as hard as she possibly could. And all the time I'm thinking, oh, I hope I didn't lock the front door. So as I get closer, I threw down my bike. I run the last 10 yards to my door. Thankfully, it turned. I get in and slam the door behind me and then peek out the window. And the bear, at that point, had stopped and had now decided to go back and find her cub. The next day, when I told my other ranger buds that this had happened, they thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard and actually didn't believe me. So that night, we did the same thing. We watched movies, and I said, you know what, this time I'm going to take the shuttle back up the valley. And as we got to the exact same spot, there was the bear, the mother, and the cub in the exact same spot, again, just hanging out there. They obviously had found some food source that they enjoyed, and so they had made a date of it and a place that they would hang out. So again, these are the types of things. And then I realized if I had been either a foot to one side or the other, I probably would have hit one of those animals, and it would have ended very differently for me that night. So anyway, another kind of just different adventure. So despite all my crazy adventures and countless questions, as I mentioned last night, there's some things that I learned. So I was going to say, what did I learn when I was in the national parks? So I'm glad you asked. Besides learning about, the park's resources and wildlife, I did learn some things about the people that actually join or go to national parks. So if you take a look at this, you see a crowd of people at Yellowstone. It's probably the typical, image you see. I took this. And for some, you see, crowds, you see people, you probably see noise, that sort of thing. But what I see are people that are coming to the park for a whole host of different reasons. They come to see the wildlife, they come to see the awe-inspiring scenery. But I also realize that people come to parks to be connected to something bigger than themselves, something lasting. You see, the mission of the National Park Service is to preserve and protect our national parks unimpaired for future generations. In other words, these parks are a gift from our predecessors that we hang on to give to the future. And that is a mythic mission that people can't help but be attracted to. So when I look at this, I see people standing in awe of something that has been given to us and working to help preserve and protect and pass on to future generations. As I said, I've given thousands of campfire talks, evening programs, and guided hikes. And at the beginning of every one of those talks, like most rangers, you start by warming up the crowd by saying, "Hey, where's everybody from?" And one of the things I realized in doing that is that, well, people when if they're nearby, let's say they're from Jackson Hole, they'll say, "Where are you from?" They'll say they're from Jackson. If someone was, say, from Boston, they'd say, "Well, I'm from Massachusetts." And then if someone said they were was from Germany, from Berlin, they would say, "I'm from Germany." And what I realized is that the farther one gets away from their home, in the national parks in particular, the more people they were willing to associate or identify with. Well, I don't know if you've heard, but there are actually efforts to create and designate historic sites on the moon. And I suspect one day that a park ranger will be leading a hike out to the Apollo 11 landing site, and she'll start by saying, "Okay, hey, where's everybody from?" And without hesitating, I'm sure everyone will signal over their shoulder with their thumb and say, "See that big blue ball over there? That's where I'm from." Parks have the power to create common ground and break down barriers and allow us to see the similarities between each of us. And I think in this day and age, we need more places like that. So I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I really do appreciate your time and attention. I do have a few minutes if you want to ask some questions. So here's my contact information. You can learn more about me, some of the things I do. Thank you very much.